Hello everyone, and welcome to the City of Marlboro's 100th year anniversary celebration of women's suffrage. For those who may not know me, my name is Samantha Perlman, and I'm one of the current city councilors. It is an honor to stand before all of you for such a special and joyous occasion. We take great pride in being able to share the significance of this day with so many fantastic former and current elected women, many of whom are here with us today. And if you look around, they'll be carrying a yellow rose to signify that they're current or past elected. So let's give them a round of applause. I also want to take a moment to thank members of our delegation in attendance. U.S. Congresswoman Lori Trahan, I believe State Senator Jamie Eldridge will be joining us as well, State Representatives Danielle Gregoire and Carmine Gentile, and we also have Mayor Arthur Vigent, members of the Marlboro City Council, and the school committee in attendance. Thank you to my fellow councilors Katie Roby and Laura Wagner for co-planning this event, and to the Mayor's Office and the Historical Commission for their help as well. Now it is wonderful to be able to introduce Mayor Arthur Vigent to say a few words and present the official Suffrage Centennial Proclamation on behalf of the City of Marlboro to commemorate this occasion.
Thank you, Councilor. It's a beautiful day out here. Even with all the COVID around us, it's a great group, and everyone has their masks on. It's fantastic to be out here and to be able to see so many people that I've actually had the pleasure serving with many of you over the years. So it's really an honor to be able to be here with you all today. And I did want to bring this proclamation. Proclamation. Whereas August 26th is Women's Equality Day, and in 2020 is recognizing the 100th anniversary of the certification of the 19th Amendment, granting women the right to vote. And whereas the 19th Amendment to the United States Constitution, called the Susan B. Anthony Amendment, passed Congress in 1919. It was endorsed by 36 states in 14 months. And whereas the anniversary of women's suffrage presents an opportunity to honor the unrelenting tendency and spirit of the multitude of women and men who work to secure women's right to vote. And whereas it was the hope of our foremothers who fought and died for women's suffrage that future generations of women would use the hard-won vote to make this a better world and to fight for full equality and justice for women. Now, therefore, I, Arthur G. Vigent, Mayor, do proclaim Wednesday, August 26, 2020, is Women's Suffrage Centennial in the City of Marlboro, and urge all of our residents to recognize this event and participate fittingly in its observance. Thank you very, very much for coming today. Congratulations. And who gets the proclamation?
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mayor Vigent. It is now my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, who I'm so glad was able to join us here in Marlboro. Thank you for spending your morning with us. Let's give it up for our Congresswoman representing the 3rd Congressional District, Lori Trahan.
Ooh. Well, good morning. It's great to be here. Thank you, Councilor Perlman. And good morning to everyone. I'm so grateful to be able to join you all for this celebration of the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment. I'd like to first acknowledge Councilors Perlman, Roby, and Wagner for all their tremendous work organizing this event to mark such an important milestone in our history. And of course, offer my gratitude to all of those who are in attendance, who came together to make today possible. Certainly Mayor Vigent, all of the city councilors who I haven't seen in months, my tremendous partners in state government, Representatives Gentile and Gregoire, Senator Eldridge, who I know will be joining us. He doesn't miss an event. It's just tremendous to see all of you. And how about Councilor Samantha Perlman? She made history just last year when she was elected to the City Council, becoming the youngest woman ever to hold elected office here in Marlboro. It's such a tremendous achievement, and and one where she gets to stand on the shoulders of so many women who are here today. Looking around this celebration, this gathering, it's heartening and it's exciting to see how far we've come as a nation since the women's suffrage in the early part of the 20th century. And to be honest, ever since I started in the workforce more than 35 years ago, never before have women had as much representation at the decision-making table as we do right now. But like so many of us know, we are still underrepresented in leadership positions. That's true across every sector of our economy and every level of our government, but it's especially apparent in Washington. Despite my being part of the most diverse and the most female freshman class in the history of the United States Congress, women still make up just over 25% of the members of the House. And the same goes for the Senate, where just 26 of the 100 seats are occupied by women. And it's not a coincidence that, much like other sectors, those numbers are even more disproportionate for women of color. Equal representation is just the first hurdle that women face when it comes to having their voices heard. The next comes when we get the seat at the table and expect to be taken seriously. And we all have those stories that we carry with us on not being taken seriously. Before I ran for Congress, I was the only female executive at a high-tech company. So I know what it's like to have a seat at the table, and I also know what it feels like when your ideas are either dismissed or worse, stolen. As more women join the company and frankly the industry, we changed the culture so that women not only had their say, but their ideas were elevated and their ideas were properly attributed. Then I moved on to co-found a consulting firm with 2 other women, where we focused on doing the same thing for companies across the globe, setting the conditions for women to thrive and to ascend to more leadership positions. So when the opportunity arose to continue the trend of women representing the 3rd Congressional District in the House of Representatives, I knew I was going to do whatever it took to get elected and to work to create a better community, a better economy, a better environment, and a better nation for my 2 young girls, but frankly for all of our children. When Congresswoman spoke on my election night, it marked the first time in Massachusetts history where one woman representative passed the baton to another woman. And 2 years ago, Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley and I joined Congresswoman Catherine Clark and Senator Elizabeth Warren in the Massachusetts delegation, but also with 127 other women in the U.S. Congress, the most in our nation's history. Now, I'll be the first one to tell you that the work hasn't always been easy, but it is because of the relentless advocacy of the generations of women that come before us who refused to be silenced when they spoke out for the right to vote and to strengthen and protect women's rights, that we're able to continue the fight for equality for everyone today. And it's no coincidence that Massachusetts has always led the way in this regard, hosting the National Women's Rights Convention in Worcester in 1850, where 268 men and women from around the country gathered 70 years before women finally won the right to vote to chart the course on how to achieve women's suffrage. We owe it to them to continue to push for true paycheck fairness that eliminates the gender wage gap in our country, that sees women only making 80 cents on average for every dollar earned by men. We have to tackle that same gap that grows even wider for women of color, for African American women who are paid 61 cents on average on the dollar, and for Latina women, just 53 cents. As a woman, I'm still just one, I think about using my seat at the table to make sure we have fairness in the workplace, free of sexual discrimination and abuse, but also equal pay for equal work and paid family and sick leave. And as a mom of 2 young girls and 3 grown stepsons, I think a lot about our future. Investing in our public education system, making college more affordable, ensuring that our planet is healthy for centuries to come, and ending gun violence. You know, much of those policy prescriptions ebb and flow with cleaning up Washington, getting rid of the corrosive influence of money in our politics, protecting our elections, and ending the insidious practices of gerrymandering and voter suppression. So I'm thankful. I'm thankful for the efforts of this group of lawmakers who are pushing to do just that. And I look forward to continuing partnering with them as we work, like those who came before us, to make our community and our Commonwealth a better and more equitable place for our daughters and for future generations of women. You know, Congresswoman Tsongas used to say, you can't be what you can't see. And I'm grateful that my daughters have always, and will always, see a woman on the debate stage for U.S. President, Senator, Representative, and Select Board. That it won't be rare or novel like it was for so many of us growing up. We have more work to do, yes. But today we celebrate and we stand on the shoulders of magnificently courageous women. So thank you for everything that you do to make the city of Marlboro such an incredible place, and of course for organizing this Centennial celebration. Be well, stay safe, and please vote like your life depends on it.
I now want to call up State Representative Danielle Gregoire to also give remarks.
Good morning, everyone. I too want to echo the thanks of Congresswoman Trahan to Councilors Perlman, Wagner, and Roby for putting this event together today. It's nice to be able to finally celebrate something. We were supposed to be celebrating this accomplishment all year long, and this is really the first chance we've had, so I'm really grateful for you all for putting it together. It's an honor to be with you all here today as State Representative for Marlboro, Northborough, and Westborough to recognize this 100th anniversary of women earning the right to vote, of women being recognized as people, and of most women being recognized as the equals of men. It was a long time coming. See, most folks don't realize that the interpretation of the Declaration of Independence phrase, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal," men with a capital M, by the way, was a literal one. And it meant just that to the founders. All men are created equal. And as we all know, it didn't turn out that they even meant it that way. So this entire year we celebrate those brave women and the men who loved them, who began to organize the fight for equality in 1848 during the first Women's Rights Convention in Seneca Falls, New York. We celebrate Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Alice Paul, and Susan B. Anthony, but we also celebrate the lesser-known heroines of the suffrage movement, like Carrie Chapman Catt of Iowa, who dedicated her entire life to the movement after being told as a young girl by her family, with laugh, that women just don't vote. Elaine Weiss, who led the dangerous fight for ratification in Tennessee, knowing it was the only hope for ratification in the South. 13 states had already voted no, you see, and 9 states had already voted no, and there were few left to make it official. We celebrate Congresswoman Jeanette Rankin of Montana, the only female member of Congress to actually cast a ballot in Congress on the 19th Amendment. And I'd be remiss if, in addition to the brave women sitting in front of us today, I didn't mention some of Massachusetts' own heroines and leaders in suffrage. In 1923, Sylvia Donaldson and Susan Fitzgerald were the first women elected to the Massachusetts House of Representatives. In 1925, Edith Norris Rogers was the first woman elected to Congress from Massachusetts. In 1935, Representative Mary Livermore Norris was the first woman to chair a committee. In 1937, Sybil Holmes was the first woman from Massachusetts elected to the state Senate. In 1979, the year that I was born, Representative Iris Holland was the first woman appointed to a leadership position in the Great and General Court of Massachusetts. In 1987, Lieutenant Governor Evelyn Murphy becomes the first woman to be elected statewide, with an asterisk next to her name, because she was elected on a ticket with a male governor. The Massachusetts Commission on the Status of Women was established by the legislature in 1998. In 1999, Shannon O'Brien was the first woman elected on her own statewide as first female treasurer. In 2006, guys, it was only 14 years ago, Martha Coakley became elected the first female attorney general. In 2007, Therese Murray, the first female Senate president, and we still await the first female Speaker of the House. And in 2013, just a short 7 years ago, Elizabeth Warren was elected as the first and only woman ever to serve the Commonwealth of Massachusetts in the United States Senate. I am listed as the 166th woman to have been elected to the House of Representatives and the only woman to have ever served this city in the House. The work for women's equality goes on. Early last year, the House of Representatives adopted a Women's History Trail bill to celebrate all of these achievements and so many more. The bill was proposed by an all-female bipartisan delegation, the only one in the legislature, the group that represents the town of Westboro. The delegation includes Representative Carolyn Dykema, Representative Hannah Kane, and myself. That bill passed the House last year unanimously, and just a few short weeks ago, we passed it unanimously again as an amendment to the Economic Development Bill. That language currently awaits adoption by the Senate. So innumerable works have gone into getting us where we are today, and there will always be work to do. In fact, it wasn't until the adoption of the Voting Rights Act of 1965, signed into law by President Johnson, that true suffrage for all people in this country was attained. Until that time, literary tests and similar devices were still being used across our country to disenfranchise and deter voters, largely voters of color. A Supreme Court decision of 2013 rolled back some of those provisions, allowing a purge of voter rolls in some states and a resurgence of voter ID laws, again, depriving American citizens their right to vote. So what do we do next? We tip our white hats to those who fought so that the right of the citizens of the United States to vote shall not be abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex. Then, as the Congresswoman said, we vote, like our own lives and the lives of those we love depend on it, because they do. Remember the women and the men of the suffrage movement and truly honor them by taking action this and every day. Thank you.
Thank you so much, State Representative Gregoire. So now I'm going to speak, so I hope you haven't heard too much of me yet. As one of the new city councilors and youngest woman to serve, I'm constantly reminded of all of the women before me that paved the way for our right to vote. The 19th Amendment was ratified on August 18th, 1920, and officially certified 100 years ago today. Yet, as was mentioned before, the battle to achieve women's suffrage happened long before 1920 and has continued past the 19th Amendment's ratification as Black women and other women of color continued to fight for their rights to vote, not achieving it until the Voting Rights Act of 1965. It's important to note that the women of the Iroquois Nation had an influence on suffrage leaders in Seneca Falls, New York. Their cultural ideas of balance, egalitarian life, and women prominence likely framed suffragist thinking around women's equality. And many of you have heard about the incredible leaders within the suffrage movement. Ida B. Wells, Lucretia Mott, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Susan B. Anthony, the list goes on. However, I want to take today to share a story of a woman in the suffrage movement whose name is likely unknown to many of you, but her long-standing impact is paramount. Her name was Crystal Eastman. And believe it or not, we play a small part in her journey, although brief, as she was actually born right here in Marlboro at the corner of Bolton and Washington Street, not too far from where we currently stand. She is even included now as part of our Marlboro Museum in the Streets. Her life as an advocate was filled with determination for women to achieve new heights in all spheres of public and private life. Crystal was born in the parsonage in Marlboro on June 25th, 1881. Her father, Reverend Samuel Elijah Eastman, was the minister in the area at the time. The family then moved to New York in 1883, where Crystal's mother became the first woman in New York State to be ordained a Protestant minister. Crystal graduated from Vassar in 1903, received a master's in sociology from Columbia in 1904, and a JD from NYU Law in 1907, becoming one of only a few hundred women with a law degree in the early 20th century. A Renaissance woman, she co-founded the National Women's Party, the Women's Peace Party, co-published the Liberator magazine, and engineered the founding of the ACLU. Most importantly, she carried on the torch of the suffrage movement, as she, Alice Paul, and others brought their advocacy to the next step, to co-author the Equal Rights Amendment, first introduced in Congress in 1923. In 2000, Crystal was even inducted into the National Women's Hall of Fame. Not too bad for a woman born right here in Marlboro. Personally, I am so proud that Crystal Eastman, one of the leaders of the suffrage movement, had her path crossed right here with ours in Marlboro. To uplift her sense of possibility, I'm going to highlight an excerpt from her first prominent public speech, entitled "Now We Can Begin," that she wrote in 1920 after the ratification of the 19th Amendment. Her multifaceted perspective advocated for equality, not only in the political realm through voting and holding office, in economics in the workplace for equal opportunity and equal pay for equal work, but also in the private sphere of love, marriage, and the family. And so she writes, "Most women will agree that August 23rd, the day when the Tennessee legislature finally enacted the federal suffrage amendment, is a day to begin with, not a day to end with. Men are saying perhaps, thank God this everlasting women's fight is over. But women, if I know them, are saying, now at last we can begin. In fighting for the right to vote, most women have tried to be either non-committal or thoroughly respectable on every other subject. Now they can say what they are really after, and what they are after in common with all of the rest of the struggling world is freedom. Freedom is a large word. What then is the matter with women? What is the problem of women's freedom? It seems to me to be this: how to arrange the world so that women can be human beings with a chance to exercise their infinitely varied gifts in infinitely varied ways. Crystal's extensive dedication to the future of women demonstrates that those who often make the most impact are left out of the narrative or do not receive recognition for their service. Thus, I want to take this moment to highlight all of the past and present elected women in our community, many of whom are here with us today, for dedicating time to serve in elected office. We are grateful for your commitment to community and your role in carrying out the legacy of the suffrage movement through serving in these roles. So I will now read off the names of the women, and these are included in your pamphlet, who have been elected to the City Council, as mayor, and on the school committee. And I just want to note some dates because I thought they were pretty interesting. The first female school committee member was not elected until 1935. The first female city councilor not elected until 1976. And the first female mayor not elected until 2006. Did it blow away? Okay. So for a women elected mayor, Nancy Stevens from 2006 to 2012. Women elected to the City Council, Josephine P. Plass, Councilor at Large, 1976 to 1977. Cynthia Vale, Councilor Ward 1, 1976 to 1983. Marilyn Perry, Councilor at Large, 1984 to 1991. June P. Haddad, Councilor Ward 3, 1986 to 1989. Danielle Bonin, Councilor Ward 2, 1988 to 1989. Natalie Lashmit, Councilor Ward 1, 1990 to 1997. Joan Ledoux, Councilor Ward 3, 1995. Lucinda F. Zomar, Councilor Ward 7, 1996 to 1999. Mary Jo Naraki, Councilor Ward 3, 1998 to 2003. Patricia A. Polk, Councilor Ward 4 from 1998 to 2005, and Councilor at Large from 2006 to 2015. Natalie Towell, Councilor Ward 7, 2000 to 2003. Nancy E. Stevens, Councilor at Large, 2004 to 2005. Mara Navin Webster, Councilor Ward 5, 2004 to 2007. Kathleen D. Roby, Councilor at Large, 2012 to the present. And Laura Wagner, Councilor Ward 1, 2020 to the present. And myself, Councilor at Large, 2020 to the present. So let's give a round of applause for them. And then for the women elected to the Marlboro School Committee, Edna M. Granitsas, 1935 to 1939. Eleanor B. C. Nordgren, 1953 to 1957. Hazel D. Miel, 1973 to 1977. Mary Lou Vanzini, 1977 to 1989. Barbara Lobel, 1983 to 1987. Barbara Boyle, 1987 to 1991. Deborah Lawrence, 1987 to 1991. Mary Jo Naraki, 1991 to 1995. Denise Scott, 1993 to 2001. Kathleen D. Roby, 1995 to 2011. Susan Simpson, 1995 to 1999. Nancy E. Stevens, 1999 to 2003. Elaine Martell, 2001 to 2005. Michelle B. Bowden-Hettinger, 2005 to the present. Margaret M. Dwyer, 2007 to 2013. Catherine H. Hennessy, 2007 to the present. Jennifer L. Hardy, 2008 to 2013. Heidi A. Matthews, 2011 to the present. And Denise E. Ryan, 2013 to the present. And we also have a few women from the Assabet School Committee, so I want to acknowledge Renelde Poole, 1969 to 1985, and Peggy Ayers from 2016 to the present. So if we could give them all a round of applause. I will close to say thank you to all of the elected women who are here. You are the real-world heroines among us and inspire me. Thank you for allowing the City of Marlboro to be a small part of your story. I will now hand it off to my fellow City Councilor, Katie Roby, to share a little more about the suffrage movement and specifically the involvement of the Junior Women's Club. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. As a member of a local women's organization, GFWC Marlboro Junior Women's Club, I knew of the importance of this year and especially the date of August 26th. I was actually supposed to be in Virginia for the welcoming of the Turning Point Memorial. Because that got canceled, I am available today. Councilor Perlman and I had discussed the need for a celebration of the 100th anniversary of the passage of the 19th Amendment early in the year. With COVID and social distancing, it went on the back burner. Recently, we decided it was too important to not do something, so we decided to join forces and came up with a plan. Today's event has no cake and no balloons, but we did give flowers to the women elected to various offices to represent the city that are here today. Many of you know me as a woman elected to office by residents of Marlboro. Today I stand before you as a woman elected GFWC Massachusetts Director of Junior Clubs by junior club women across the Commonwealth. So who is GFWC and why do I mention them? I mention them because the women of this organization were advocates of women's rights and supported the suffrage movement, and I want you to know their story. Jane Cunningham Crowley was a journalist who many believe created the first syndicated women's column under the pen name of Jenny June. She organized venues for women to meet and discuss issues of middle-class women. In 1869, when she was refused entry into a women's-only reception for Charles Dickens because she was a woman, she started her own women's club and named it Cirrhosis, meaning Center of Unity. Women's clubs began forming across the country, and in 1890, Crowley formed the General Federation of Women's Clubs. Massachusetts has its own story. Julia Howe was a wealthy young woman who was born in Rhode Island. On a visit to the New England Institute for the Blind, she met and became smitten with its director, Dr. Samuel Howe. They married, and she gave birth to 6 children. Julia's life wasn't easy, and her marriage was troubled. Her husband preferred life at the Perkins Institute, but wanted Julia to be content as a homemaker. She preferred to publish poetry, and as the marriage faltered, she wrote dark poems about her unhappiness. During the Civil War, she worked for the U.S. Sanitary Commission. They promoted clean and hygienic conditions for soldiers and hospitals. She was pro-union and anti-slavery. She said Her visit with Union troops in the thick of the Civil War were the inspiration for her most famous poem, which the Atlantic Monthly published in 1862, The Battle Hymn of the Republic. Howe was an active member of the New England Women's Club and traveled with Crowley to promote the clubs as a means for women to become better educated. Howe championed the vote for women and founded the New England Suffrage Association in 1868, as well as the Massachusetts Women's Suffrage Association. These were all part of the National Women's Suffrage Association, but this organization was divided in its support of the 15th Amendment, which gave voting rights to black men, but not women. Howe joined Lucy Stone in founding the American Women Suffrage Association and broke with the well-known suffragists Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton. In 1889, the groups reunited as the National American Woman Suffrage Association with the goal of suffrage for women. In 1893, 23 clubs formed the Massachusetts State Federation of Women's Clubs, with Julia Ward Howe as its first president. In 1991, the name was changed to General Federation of Women's Clubs of Massachusetts. From 1850, when the first National Women's Rights Convention was held in Worcester, to June 25th, 1919, when Massachusetts ratified the 19th Amendment, and through August of 1920, the women of GFWC have worked toward women's suffrage and continue to work today, working for women's rights and working for passage of many things that are important to the citizens of Massachusetts. I would now like to introduce Martha Micah Levage, who happens to be a clubwoman from Northborough. She is here to give you a little bit of history of another famous clubwoman.
Thank you, Katie, and thank you, citizens of Marlboro, women leaders. It's my pleasure to be here. As Katie said, I'm a member of the GFWC Northborough Junior Women's Club, and I'm also the chairman of the 2020 Centennial celebration, which is a celebration of the 19th Amendment. And this is not in my prepared remarks, but just before I got here, while I was getting ready, on the Today Show, they unveiled a statue of 3 suffragettes in Central Park. Central Park, as I understand, is 160 years old, and it's filled with statues of men. And today they unveiled a statue that was Cady Stanton, Susan B. Anthony, and Sojourner Truth, the black suffragette, sitting at a table working together. And I can't wait when I can travel again to go and see that statue. Obviously, everybody today has talked about the past and the present. I'm here specifically as the past. I'm a suffragette of the past, and I want to tell you about one specific incident that changed our fate of women being able to have the right to vote. And my title of my talk today is The War of the Roses. A century ago, the nation was on edge. The Americans entered the summer of 1920 in an anxious mood. The economy was slipping from recession into depression. The global pandemic of influenza was subsiding, but had already claimed 600,000 American lives. Racial unrest was roiling cities across the country, and the Ku Klux Klan was in resurgence. Labor strikes for better wages and conditions were being met with violent reprisals. Immigration was a contentious issue, and the public, wary of international entanglements, signaled a desire for more isolationist foreign policy. A nasty presidential election was underway, featuring one of the candidates' divisive slogans, America First. Does that parallel our lives today? As the summer sun of 1920 warmed the state's landscape, suffrage saw Tennessee as their last best hope for ratification of the 19th Amendment to the Constitution, granting women equal access to voting before the 1920 election. 35 of the 36 states necessary had ratified the amendment. 8 states had rejected the amendment, and 5 had not voted. Tennessee was suddenly the hotbed of a major civil liberty issue. It was felt at every level, from the State House to the outhouse. Everyone had an opinion, and few held back their views on the topic. The pressure campaign began as soon as the legislatures arrived in the state capitol. As many as 150 lobbyists descended upon Nashville, and backdoor meetings flowed with bootleg whiskey and bribery rumors. The suffragettes were lobbying the elected officials hard, pressuring for their endorsement. Also lobbying were the whiskey lobby. Whiskey was big in Tennessee, and it was felt that if women won the right to vote, they would be against the whiskey manufacturers. The mill owners were there lobbying. They were afraid that the women would do something about child labor laws. And of course they did. In the middle of all of this was Harry T. Byrne and his mother, Feb Byrne. Harry was a young 24-year-old representative in the Tennessee General Assembly. Harry was up for a re-election in a contentious race. Back home, his loudest constituents had made themselves very clear. They did not support the 19th Amendment. In addition, his mentor, Senator Herschel Candler, was very much against the suffrage movement. In a blistering speech just before the state Senate voted on ratification, Candler denounced the suffragists as low-class, childless, trying to put something over on the good women of Tennessee. I am here representing the mothers who are at home rocking the cradle and not representing the low neck and high skirt variety, Chandler said. At home in Nyota was Feb Byrne, a college-educated widow who read 3 newspapers a day and felt strongly that her mind was equal to any man's. She also was a GFWC clubwoman. She and her son had talked about the importance of suffrage before he headed to Nashville in early August 1920 for the legislative special session. Suffrage had even consulted with Harry and placed him on their yes list. In the legislature, the men who were against the 19th Amendment wore a red rose in their lapel, and those in favor wore a yellow rose. Your yellow roses today. On the morning of the vote, Harry received a letter from his mother with lots of news from back home, with 3 references admonishing Harry to vote for the 19th Amendment. One said, "Hurrah and vote for suffrage, and don't keep them in doubt." Another said, "Be a good boy and vote for suffrage." And the last said, "Please help Mrs. Cat put rat in ratification." There were 2 votes that ended in a tie, 48 to 48. On the morning of the final tally, August 18, Harry sat with a red rose in his lapel through the final debates and roll calls in the House chamber, with the note from his mother in his pocket next to his heart, as well as a yellow rose in his jacket pocket. When his name was called for the final vote on ratification, the tally tied. He could duck no longer. He had to take a stand. Byrne shocked the chamber by switching to a yellow rose and voting for ratification. The aunties accused him of taking a bribe to change his vote. He was unapologetic. The blowback from Byrne's vote was immediate. He broke the tie. The Speaker of the House promptly moved to change his vote from no to yes, a scheme to try to repeal the vote a few days later. But instead, it gave the body a constitutional majority, formally ratifying the 19th Amendment. Tennessee had become the perfect 36. The day after the vote, while hiding for his own safety, facing accusations of bribery and wrongdoing, Byrne had a statement read on the House floor which said, "I believe in full suffrage as a right, and I knew that my mother's advice is always safest for a boy to follow, and my mother wanted me to vote for ratification." Harry won re-election and went on to serve a long career in public service. And his mother had the #1 ballot in the first election allowing women the right to vote. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. I'm Councilor Laura Wagner, Ward 1. It's an honor to be here with all of you today. And I'm especially honored that I get to stand here before you as an elected official. I know that I owe a debt of gratitude to the women who came before me, those in recent history who paved the way for me, and especially those brave suffragists who sacrificed so much in order for this day to even be possible. When my daughter, Chelsea, turned 13, to celebrate, we took a road trip to Seneca Falls, site of the first Women's Rights Convention in 1848. It was inspiring to stand on the site of the Wesleyan Chapel where the meeting was held and where the Declaration of Sentiments and 11 resolutions were passed. And most memorable is the Declaration of Sentiments monument, which is a wall that has the dedication etched into it and water cascades over the front. The water element reflects the spirit of the Bible verse, "Let justice roll down like waters and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream." It is a beautiful sight. I spend a lot of time thinking about what's possible during these unprecedented times. The complexity of our people, the complexity and diversity of our people has always been a strength, and yet there is a long history of denying this fact. We see this written into laws that discriminate and condemn and policies that segregate. Throughout history, we have challenged unjust laws that weaken our nation. Excluding whole segments of our population weakens our democracy. The suffragists knew this. They knew their lack of voting rights meant lack of value for them as human beings, and this had to be changed. Yet even though it took 70 years for women to get the vote, we've seen that it's easier to change laws than it is to change attitudes. Women won the vote in 1920, and yet they continued to be excluded from many institutions of higher learning. Many professions and well-paying jobs were not available to them. And there were no protections from abuse in marriage or protections of their parental rights or their personal property in the event of separation. It took the women's movement 50 years later to address a lot of these issues, but the legacy of inequality continues with pay disparity, domestic violence, and the cost of sexual harassment in the workplace. It's important to understand the history of the suffragist movement, but even more important to understand it within today's context. The women of this movement were extraordinary, but they were no different from anyone who is here today. We all have the capacity to do extraordinary things as long as we are up for the challenge. It's also important to remember that the suffragists were not perfect. They argued amongst themselves about how to achieve their goals, and the movement eventually split into two groups. The suffragist movement included black women, and yet, as they came closer to achieving this goal, including black women in the right to vote was abandoned. We saw these same types of divides 50 years later in the women's rights movement. It is important to learn from history, but it's also important to understand the complexities in any movement. Rarely is anything all good or all bad, and it's up to us to understand those complexities. It's also important to understand that we all gain when all the people in our society are included. Abraham Lincoln said, "A house divided cannot stand." This is true for our city, our state, and our nation. Unity and equity are not the default state of a community. It's something for which we have to actively work to achieve. History has shown that when any group of people is excluded from our shared democracy, they are marginalized, devalued, and exploited. No community, state, or nation can thrive when only some of the people are valued. Too many people have been and are shut out of the democratic process. Anyone who is able to vote must treasure this right and pay attention to what's happening in their community, their state, and their nation. Martin Luther King Jr. said in his letter from the Birmingham jail, "An injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." We need to remember this. We all benefit when our communities are strong and thriving, but we also know that sometimes we fall short. As the German philosopher Hegel described, we are always in a state of becoming. The community we envision today will need to change in order to meet the needs of the future. The community we seek to create will take all of us working together, protecting our democracy, and striving to create a city and a nation where all people are honored and valued. We really appreciate all of you for being here today, and we hope you think about the history, but also remember the context of today's moment. History is never stale and static. It's always there to inform us for where we are in this moment. So with that, I'd like to remind people you could take advantage of early voting today. Early voting will continue through Friday, August 28th from 9 to 5 over at the Senior Center right on New Street. Wednesday, August 26th is the last day to apply by mail for either a vote by mail ballot or an absentee ballot. The application must be received by 5 p.m. That is an actual deadline. There's no ish after that. It has to be there by 5 p.m. And Monday, August 31st, is the last day to apply in person for absentee ballots for the state primary. Applications on that day must be received by the city clerk's office no later than 12 p.m. And of course, September 1st is our state primary day, and I'm sure everybody here today will be voting either early or on that day. And I want to thank you. I don't know, Samantha, if you have any closing remarks, but why don't we, wasn't Katie and Samantha come up together? We want to really thank you today. This is such an important day. I'm so proud of all the work that you both did to make this happen, and thank you, everybody, for being here with us.
And I would just add that the drop box for vote by mail, you can drop it off right there. Many people are located, so you can, if you have a vote by mail ballot, you're able to submit that right there. So just want to add that that's over here. Thank you all.
And I will thank the Northborough Junior Women's Club for all of the posters that you see hanging here today. Please read them, learn some history about the suffragists. There's also some information on the table. Again, thank you all for coming. Thank you to our former elected and current officials.